Good morning, everyone, and Merry Christmas. I'm very delighted and honored to be here. I won't share my exact birth story with you, I'm sure, although I will say that my parliamentary secretary at the time, who was a man, said, just, make sure your husband wears comfortable shoes. And I said, okay, all right, I'll tell him to do that. And he said, it's just my feet hurt so much after my wife gave birth that you don't realize it. Okay. So I think there's perhaps a reason why Joseph doesn't figure, as much in the story as Mary does. But one thing that I'll just say, and certainly I'm really just delighted to be here with all of you. It's nice to see people in person, and I know that these are difficult times, and so I am glad that we're able to gather today. But it's something that I've only started recently reflecting on because I've had a lot of conversations, particularly with younger women who are interested in getting into politics. And when the House returned about a month ago, I was sitting there on the day that the House was opening, and there were two babies in the House of Commons. A 12-week-old from a Conservative member from Fort McMurray out in Alberta, and a 7-month-old from Laurel Collins, who's an NDP member from Victoria in British Columbia. And as I was sitting there, I was thinking, my goodness, how things have changed. Because these two women were sitting there with their babies, opening the House of Commons, and it wasn't news. No one was talking about it, because it was seen as something that was generally accepted. And I walked out of the House that day, and another young woman who's a Conservative MP from Manitoba stopped me, and she said, I just wanted to say thank you, because you've changed the narrative. And what you represented by being so high profile and pregnant and having a baby and returning to work and making it seem as if it was normal meant that for more young women of childbearing age, this was a possible career choice for them. And it wasn't something that they had to choose between a life of service to our community and our country and having a family. And for me, that was quite a lovely moment and conversation to have, because as any of you who have been pregnant or started a family, sometimes it's hard to think beyond the immediate moment and what that means for others and what you're demonstrating to them. And one of the things that was kind of funny for me is if you've had a baby before and you find out you're pregnant, who are the first people you tell? Well, if you're a woman, it's probably your partner, right? That's probably the number one. The second is maybe your parents. Well, the third for me was the Prime Minister. And so, because I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want him to find out from someone else, because this is kind of a big deal. So I had to call him, and I asked him, when I spoke to him, and I said, Prime Minister, I'm sorry to bother you. It's a Saturday, but I have a question for you. And he said, okay, Karina, what is it? And I said, is there a policy for maternity leave for cabinet ministers? And he was like, oh my goodness, Karina, congratulations. This is so exciting. And then the next thing he said to me is, we're going to make this work. We're going to make sure that you can be successful at this, because this is important to demonstrate that not only can we have young women in cabinet who have, big responsibilities, but they can also choose to have a family if that's what they want, and they can be successful. And I have to say that as another supporting man in my life, he has been extraordinary in making it work. And it was kind of stressful to be so high profile. And the next conversation that I had with my mom was, what happens if I have a miscarriage? What happens if I lose the baby after I've announced to my community, the whole country, the whole world? What happens then? And my mom, in her wonderful sage advice, says, well, then you tell people what happened, because that's a normal part of life too. And you now have a platform to talk about issues that many women don't have. And so you take it one day at a time, and you share your story, and you lead by example. Now, unfortunately, my mom passed away just before I gave birth. 4 years ago, she had a stroke. She also had cancer. And so I was spending most of the holidays with her, either at Joseph Brant or Carpenter Hospice. And she passed away on New Year's Eve 2017 when I was 7.5 months pregnant. So she never got to meet Oliver. So it was a difficult time in my life because it was one that was filled on the one hand with joy and anticipation, and with one, on the other with intense grief and sadness. But she taught me so much about how to be a strong woman, have a career, and have a family. She was a veterinarian here in Burlington. She owned Askey Animal Hospital on Fairview and Walkers. And while she had 6 veterinary clinics, she also had 4 children. And so I learned a lot from her as how to make sure that I could make both work. And the pregnancy part wasn't so difficult in terms of the high profile. What was stranger is when I returned to Parliament Hill 10 weeks after giving birth with a stroller. And that was certainly something that was very high profile and attracted a lot of attention. But the good news is that there were many colleagues who stepped in to help. And we know that it takes a village to raise any child. And I certainly had an incredible village, including the then Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, Jean-Yves Duclos, who one time when I had to run in to do a debate in the House of Commons said, "Don't worry, Karina, I will take care of Oliver. I am the Minister of Children after all." And I said, okay. So I went in to do my debate, and I come back out. There's no stroller. There's no baby. There's no Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development. And so I'm running around the House of Commons, the halls of Parliament, and there he is, happily pushing the baby in the stroller, going around and taking very good care of Oliver. But most importantly for me, it was the fact that it was demonstrating that women could be in these positions of power and they could also have a family. And so for that, I am very grateful for the support of this community, who I feel also is helping to raise Oliver still, for that of my parliamentary family, and for women and men right across this country who have been incredibly supportive and for whom doors have opened and remained opened. And one of the conversations, and I'll just conclude with this, is many of you are probably familiar with Sheila Copps, right? So she was the first female parliamentarian in Canada to have a baby. She was in opposition in 1988. So Sheila has been a for me and the friend who I have called sometimes in moments of what the heck am I doing here. And in the summer of 2018, so Oliver would have been 4 or 5 months old, and I was saying, this is really hard. It's really hard to, be a new mom and carry out my parliamentary responsibilities. And she said to me, well, Karina, what do you want your legacy to be? And I said, well, I have this law that I'm trying to pass for the Canada Elections Act. And she said, no. What do you want to be different when you leave office from when you arrived? And I said, well, I want it to be easier for the next woman who wants to have a baby in Parliament. And she said, okay, well, go away and figure out how you're going to do that. So in June of 2019, nobody noticed this, but a motion quietly passed in the House of Commons that gave members of Parliament parental leave. I was sitting there quietly, a motion was introduced, it received unanimous consent, and now any member of Parliament who has a baby, adopts a baby, who has a child that is sick within the first year can take up to 12 months parental leave. And that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for me having the baby and working with House leaders on all sides of the House to move that forward. So that for me is one of my proudest things that I've been able to accomplish, but it also means that not only have we opened the door, we're holding it open and making sure that it's easier for that next woman who comes along to do what I did. So thank you so much for having me, and very, very Merry Christmas to all of you.